My name is Nicholas. In this university, that name isn't anything special. It appears on class lists, on student IDs, in professors' emails. A very ordinary American name, safe, unremarkable. I used to think I was like that too. An ordinary guy living within boundaries, not too loud, not too standout. Until I met Nick. It's funny, because his name is so similar to mine that at first I thought it was a joke. Nicholas and Nick. Two names side by side on the group list for Modern American Literature, fall semester of sophomore year. I remember that day clearly. An afternoon in September, sunlight slanting through the high glass windows of the humanities building, shining on the old wooden rows of seats. The professor called out names to divide groups. Nicholas Carter. Nick Miller. We both looked up at the same time. Nick's eyes met mine first. He smiled. Not the polite kind, but a fleeting, natural smile, as if two people having similar names was a small, amusing secret only we shared. My heart skipped a beat. Just one, but enough to make me realize something was veering off my familiar safe orbit. Nick was a bit taller than me, with broad shoulders and dark brown hair slightly messy, as if it never obeyed a comb. He wore a gray hoodie, old jeans, sneakers worn at the heels. A very college guy style, very American, very everyday. But there was something about him that made me unable to look at him like other guys. Maybe it was his eyes, warm, deep, and unflinching. We sat next to each other. So, Nicholas. Nick tilted his head, his voice deep and relaxed. I'm usually called Nick, he added, then smiled, as if just realizing the coincidence. But maybe today I have to give that name up to you. I can be Nicholas, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Or Nick, or whatever, as long as there's no mix-up. We laughed. A small moment, but it opened up a strange sense of familiarity, as if we'd known each other longer than a few minutes. The group work sessions started after that. The library, the campus coffee shop, sometimes the common lounge in Nick's dorm. Each time we met, I found myself anticipating it more than necessary. I noticed the way Nick listened when I spoke, how he nodded slowly, his brows slightly furrowed in thought. I even noticed silly things like how he always twirled his pen between his fingers, or his habit of drinking black coffee even though he complained it was bitter. Nick didn't hide himself. He talked about his family in Oregon, about switching majors from economics to literature because I want to study something that makes me feel alive. He spoke about his past relationship with a guy from school, straightforwardly, without defensiveness or excuses. I listened, both admiring and envious. I'd never been able to talk about myself that easily. I was the one who kept things hidden. Not because I didn't accept that I was gay, I'd known that for a long time, but because I was used to keeping everything under control. Emotions, desires, those quiet crushes. I feared the chaos that feelings could bring. Feared loving someone too much. Nick was the opposite. He lived as if unafraid of getting hurt, and that both drew me closer and made me want to pull away. One late evening, as we stayed in the library almost until closing time, Nick suddenly asked, "Do you ever get tired of always being the most put-together version of yourself?" The question stunned me. I think, yes, I replied after a few seconds of silence. But I don't know if I have any other choice. Nick looked at me, his eyes softening. You do, but it's scary. In that moment, amid the tall bookshelves and the cold fluorescent lights, I felt a door opening, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to step through it yet. My feelings for Nick grew gradually through the little things. In the way he called me Nicholas when he was serious and Nick when he was teasing. In the accidental touches that lingered longer than needed. In the comfortable silences when we sat side by side without needing to say a word. I started craving more. Not just physical closeness, but a deep intimacy where I could let go of my defenses, where I could be myself without fear of judgment. But at the same time, the fear grew too, because loving a guy like Nick, free, sincere, unafraid of pain, meant facing the most fragile parts of myself, and I didn't know if I had the courage. I realized I'd started measuring time by Nick's presence. Not by class schedules or assignment deadlines, but by the afternoons with him, the evenings without him, and those hard-to-name voids when Nick was busy with his own things. Confused me. I'd never let anyone take up so much space in my mind before. One Friday evening, Nick invited me to a small party at an off-campus student house. Not too noisy, he said. Just a few friends. Beer, old indie music, and a balcony overlooking the parking lot. Very romantic. I almost declined. Parties were never my comfort zone. But I nodded. Because of Nick. It was always because of Nick. The apartment was cramped, with the smell of beer mixed with cold pizza. People laughed and chatted, squeezed into the tight space. Nick introduced me to a few friends, naturally as if I belonged there. I stood beside him, holding a beer bottle that I sipped slowly, trying to stay calm. Nick was at ease in the crowd. He laughed loudly, told stories, lightly touched people's shoulders as he spoke. I watched, feeling both admiration and a vague, unclear jealousy. I didn't want to share him. The thought startled me. We stepped out onto the balcony when the indoor air got stuffy. It was cold, the wind making me shiver. Nick stood close enough that I could feel his warmth. "You okay?" Nick asked, his voice lower. "Yeah, just a bit overwhelmed," I admitted honestly. Nick nodded. "Me too, but in a different way." We stood in silence, looking down at the deserted parking lot. The yellow lights cast shadows on the still cars, creating a strange sense of isolation amid a crowded party. "Nicholas," Nick said, using my full name this time. "Have you ever liked someone so much that it scares you?" I turned to look at him. Nick's eyes weren't playful like usual. They were serious, vulnerable. "I think so," I replied. "But I usually don't let it get that far." Nick smiled faintly. "I always let it go too far." A long silence stretched out. My heart pounded so hard I worried he could hear it. I wanted to ask what he was thinking. Wanted to know if I was part of that question. But I didn't dare. Nick was the one to break the silence. He turned to face me directly. The distance between us was so short I could see every detail of his face. The faint freckles on the bridge of his nose, his slightly chapped lips. "If I mess everything up," Nick said slowly, "would you walk away?" The question hung between us, fragile and dangerous. I didn't know how to answer. I only knew that if I lied, I'd lose something important. "I'm not good with chaos," I said. "But I don't want to walk away." Nick exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath for ages. He took half a step closer. I didn't back away. The kiss didn't happen. There was no dramatic moment. Just a tense closeness, like a string stretched to its breaking point. Then Nick stepped back first. "We should go inside," he said, his voice hoarse. "Before I do something you're not ready for." I nodded, but inside, I felt a vague sense of loss. I was both relieved and disappointed, and that scared me. After that night, things between us changed. Not overtly, not named, but undeniable. Touches became more deliberate. Messages dragged on late into the night. Conversations shifted from just schoolwork to fears, dreams, and old wounds. Nick told me about the first time he fell for a guy and got abandoned right after daring to come out. I told him about always hiding behind achievements and stability. We shared our most vulnerable parts, little by little. And I started to realize a terrifying truth. I was in love with Nick, not a light, controllable love, but the kind that kept me up at night, analyzing every word, every glance. The kind that made me want to believe I deserved to be chosen. But loving Nick also meant accepting the risk of pain. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to pay that price. I realized I loved Nick in a very quiet way. There was no explosive moment I could point to and say, "This is it." It was just one morning when I woke up and the first thing I did was check if Nick had messaged me. It was remembering his schedule better than my own. It was the strange sense of reassurance every time I saw him at the back of the class, chin in hand, looking at me with eyes that said, "I'm here." But that love also brought a lingering insecurity. Nick didn't belong to anyone. He was free, approachable, always surrounded by people. I wasn't. I was the one defined by boundaries, plans, control. I feared that if I took one more step toward Nick, I'd shatter the fragile balance I'd built. One evening, Nick knocked on my dorm room door unexpectedly. He looked exhausted, jacket slung loosely over his shoulders, hair wet from the rain. I let him in without asking questions. Nick sat on my bed, hands clasped together, staring at the floor. "You okay?" I asked. Nick smiled faintly, but didn't look at me. "I'm not sure." We sat in silence for a while. I sat beside him, close enough that our shoulders touched. I didn't know what to do except be there. "I ran into my ex today," Nick said. "By chance. At the coffee shop near campus." My heart clenched. "And how was it?" "Not what I expected," he replied. "I thought I'd moved on. But it turns out some wounds just lie dormant. They don't vanish." Nick looked up at me. His eyes were more fragile than I'd ever seen. "I'm afraid of repeating it all," he said. "Afraid of loving someone and ending up hurting us both." I swallowed hard. "Nick, you're not the type to hurt people. At least not on purpose." "But the outcome is still the same," he whispered. I wanted to tell him I was ready, that I'd take the risk, but the words stuck in my throat. I was afraid that once I said them, there'd be no turning back. Nick reached out and touched my hand. A light touch, but full of meaning. I didn't pull away. "Do you believe in the right person at the wrong time?" Nick asked. I thought about it. "I believe more in people being afraid than in bad timing." Nick smiled sadly. "You always say things that make me think." We sat like that for a long time. No quis, no promises. Just each other's presence. But I knew the line between us was fading. A few days later, Nick started pulling away. Not obviously, not abruptly, just fewer messages, postponed meetups, averted glances in class. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. But intuition doesn't lie. One afternoon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I found Nick in the library. He was sitting alone, headphones on, but he took them off immediately when he saw me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shakier than I intended. Nick nodded. We went outside and sat on a bench near the central campus square. Fall leaves drifted down around us. It was a scene beautiful enough to break your heart. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked bluntly. Nick shook his head. "No. You didn't do anything." "Then why are you avoiding me?" Nick looked at me for a long time, as if weighing every word. "Because I don't want to drag you into my chaos." I smiled bitterly. "You're not giving me the choice." Nick sighed. "I know, and I hate myself for it." I turned to face him. "Nick, I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be honest." He looked at me, his eyes wavering. "I like you. A lot. Maybe more than is safe." My heart raced. "Then why not try?" "Because I'm scared," Nick said plainly. "And I think you are too." He was right. I was scared. But the truth was, I was more scared of losing him. "I'm scared," I admitted. "But I don't want to live in what-ifs." A gust of wind blew through. Nick ran a hand through his hair and exhaled deeply. Then he did something I didn't expect. He leaned in, his forehead gently touching mine. "You're so unfair," Nick whispered. "You make me want to believe." Our first kiss happened like that. Slow, hesitant, but genuine. His lips were warm. I felt the whole world condense into that moment. When we pulled apart, Nick smiled. A smile that was both happy and frightened. "We're going to ruin everything," he said. "Maybe," I replied, "but at least together." And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that loving guys like us, fragile as it was, full of risks, was still worth it. After that kiss, things didn't get simpler. If anything, they became more real and therefore more dangerous. Nick and I didn't declare anything. No, what are we? No agreements or clear labels. We just flowed into each other as if it was inevitable. We started staying over in each other's rooms. Not sex right away. There were nights when it was just lying beside each other, talking in the dark, voices whispering as if afraid to shatter something delicate. Nick told me about his high school years, the feeling of being out of place when he realized he was different, the first time he dared to hold a guy's hand in public, and the fear of being seen. I told him about the loneliness of always being the good kid, the model student, about how I'd learned to please others before understanding myself. Nick listened in a way no one else had, without judgment, without rushing to fix things. And then there were nights when the intimacy went beyond words. The first time we slept together, I was trembling. Not from lack of desire, quite the opposite. I wanted Nick so much it hurt, but I was afraid of letting someone see me completely exposed, body and soul. Nick noticed. He was slow, gentle, as if I were something precious. "Whenever you want to stop, tell me," Nick whispered. "I'm here," and I didn't tell him to stop. Afterward, we lay still, skin against skin, our heartbeats settling. Nick traced small circles on my back, absent-mindedly. I'd never felt so accepted. But along with that intimacy, the cracks started to show. Nick hated being tied down. Not because he didn't want love, but because he feared losing himself in it. Me, I craved certainty. I wanted to know my place in Nick's world. Those differences built up quietly. One evening, as we sat in Nick's car parked near the dorm, I blurted out, "Have you told anyone about us yet?" Nick was silent for a moment. "Not yet. Are you going to?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Nick stared straight ahead. "I don't know." That answer hurt more than I expected. "I'm not asking you to come out publicly," I said. "I just want to know if you see us as real." Nick turned to me, his face tense. "Nicholas, I'm here. Isn't that real?" "Being here is one thing," I replied. "Staying is what I'm asking about." The air in the car grew heavy. Nick exhaled, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I don't want to promise things I'm not sure I can keep," he said. And that's when I realized we loved each other in two different ways. I loved Nick by wanting to build something. Nick loved me by wanting to feel in the present without commitments. It all shattered mid-semester. The pressure from coursework, lack of sleep, and the vagueness between us left me exhausted. One evening, when Nick canceled our plans at the last minute to be alone, I couldn't take it anymore. "You can't just walk into my life and walk out like this," I said over the phone. My voice trembled. "I'm not a temporary refuge." Nick was silent for a long time. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you have," I said. And this time I couldn't hold back. We argued, not yelling but cutting. The pent-up words finally poured out. Nick's fears, my insecurities, the unspoken expectations. "I can't be everything to you," Nick said. "I don't need everything," I replied. "I need enough." The call ended in silence. We didn't speak for a week. That week felt eternal. I went to classes, did my work, smiled at friends, but everything felt hollow. I didn't know if loving Nick had been a mistake. But I knew one thing for sure. I'd never regretted the act of loving. On the 7th day, Nick showed up at my door. He looked rough. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped. I opened the door without a word. Nick stepped inside, standing there as if waiting for me to send him away. "I've thought a lot," he said, "and I realized I'm more afraid of losing you than of losing my freedom." My heart constricted. "I can't promise I won't hurt you," Nick continued, "but I promise I won't run away just because I'm scared." I looked at him for a long time. "I can't promise everything will be easy either." Nick nodded. "I don't need easy. I need real." I stepped forward and hugged him. Nick hugged me back tightly, as if afraid I'd vanish. In that embrace, I understood that loving guys like us wasn't a fairy tale. It was a choice every single day. And this time we chose to stay. We didn't become a perfect couple after that day. No magic erased all our fears. But one thing changed noticeably. Nick and I started choosing each other consciously. Not driven by overwhelming emotions, but because we understood the cost of walking away. We started with the small things. Nick told his two closest friends about me. It wasn't a grand coming out, just an evening in the kitchen. Beers on the table. Nick's voice slightly shaky as he said, "I'm with Nicholas." He recounted it to me later, looking both proud and terrified. I held him for a long time, as if it were a quiet triumph. As for me, I learned to loosen my grip on control. I stopped overanalyzing every delayed response. I learned to trust that Nick needing space didn't mean he'd disappear. It wasn't easy. Some days, the anxiety crept back, gnawing at my heart like an old habit. But now I wasn't facing it alone. We learned to argue without destroying everything. Disagreements still happened about time, boundaries, the future. But instead of silence or fleeing, we sat down and talked. Once, in my tiny room, Nick said, "I need you to tell me when you're scared. Don't wait until it turns to anger." And I nodded, realizing that love wasn't just a feeling. It was a skill. Amid those days, there were ordinary moments that softened my heart. Nick made awful breakfasts, eggs burnt at the edges but still arranged on the plate like it was a fancy restaurant. I'd read my essays aloud to him, and he'd lie on the floor with his head in my lap, tossing in silly comments now and then. We'd walk across campus in the evenings, our hands brushing, not always holding, but enough to know the other was there. One afternoon near the end of the school year, we sat on the grass in front of the library. Students passed by, their laughter filling the air. Nick leaned against my shoulder without hesitation. "If you'd told me a few months ago that I'd be doing this," Nick said softly, "I'd have laughed in your face." "I know," I replied. "Me too." Nick was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever think about the future?" That question used to fill me with dread. But this time I didn't panic. "I think about what's next for us," I said. "Not a whole lifetime, just the next step." Nick smiled. "I can handle that." And that was enough. At the end of the school year, we faced different paths. Nick got an internship opportunity in another state for the summer. I stayed on campus as a teaching assistant. The distance, even temporary, was still a challenge. The night before Nick left, we lay side by side in the dark. Neither of us spoke for a long time. "I'm scared," Nick admitted. "Me too," I said. Nick turned toward me, our foreheads touching. But this time, I'm not running. I placed my hand on his chest, feeling the familiar heartbeat. "I'll be here when you come back." We kissed. Not hurried, not passionate, but full of trust, like a promise that didn't need words. When Nick drove away the next morning, I stood watching until the car vanished. My heart felt empty but not void. I knew I was loving a real guy, with all his complexities, fears, and bravery. And I was learning to love myself too. Loving guys like us isn't always easy. We carry cracks, defenses, unanswered questions. But we also carry tenderness, the longing to be seen, chosen, and stayed with. If there's one thing I learned that year, it's this. Love isn't about finding someone who won't hurt you. It's about finding someone willing to stay, even when you're both afraid. And with Nick, with the guy whose name is like mine but whose heart is so different from mine, I found that.